Welcome back to Never Did It, Season 3, ladies. Wow. I'm Jake Ziegler, and I'm here with Brad Garoon. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 plus years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. Today we're covering the 1970s. We're actually doing a bonus film because this was a pretty important decade for female directors. And today we are joined by, I would say on my short list of dream guests that were actually attainable to me, I would say, James has been right near the top of my list since we started the show. I've known for over 20 years now. He's been an editor, professor, mentor, a friend, a co-pilot on a lot of treacherous car rides. So I've seen a lot of movies with James Sanford over the years. So James, so happy to have you here. Thanks for coming on.
It's delightful to be asked. Thank you so much. This is amazing.
Well, do you want to start with the most challenging movie, Brad, or should we save that one for the end?
Let's hold off. I'm not ready to talk about it yet.
All right. We can start with a new leaf. You want to tell? We were just looking at your nice Criterion package there.
Yeah, it's not Criterion. This was put out by Cinematograph, which is a sublabel of Vinegar Syndrome. But I was so stoked to get this earlier this year. It's the first time a new leaf was ever released on 4K. It had been on Blu-ray, and most of the bonus features are the same. So I chose this because, as folks who listen to the show know, I'm a Walter Matthau freak. We did our Walter Matthau complete retrospective last year. Elaine May, who directed A New Leaf, is important for this series because she was the first woman who was hired to direct a studio film, at least for Paramount, but I think for any of the major studios, in decades by the time A New Leaf came out. And the production was a disaster. She was really handled by the studio, and she eventually sued Paramount, and they countersued her. She tried to get her name taken off the movie, which turns out, if you ask me, to be a huge mistake, because I think A New Leaf is wonderful, especially on a second watch. I think I appreciate it even more now. When I watched it the first time, I was like, this is such a departure for me, watching a bunch of Walter Matthau movies all at once from what he usually does. He's putting on this posh affect, and his accent work isn't always great. I remember in the movie Goodbye Charlie, he's Greek, like a Greek American. It's really, if you're Greek, it's offensive. But on second watch, I really came to enjoy his path here. This movie's about a very rich guy who finds that he's squandered his fortune and he has to get married in 6 weeks to someone very wealthy or lose everything. And for him, lose everything means he'll probably commit suicide, as he mentions early in the film. This is a comedy, and he meets Henrietta, as played by Elaine May, the director of the film, who's just she's a botanist. She's very wealthy from family money, and she does not know how to be a person. Hilarity ensues. James, were you familiar with The New Leaf? Had you seen this before?
Yes, I had. I'm an enormous fan of Elaine May and Mike Nichols, going back to their work in the 50s. When they broke into the improv scene and basically redefined what American improv is, and really introduced improv, I guess you could say, into the mainstream. If you haven't read Mark Harris's biography, Mike Nichols, A Life, absolutely incredible book. Like, the majority of it is about Mike Nichols, but he and Elaine May had a very long friendship and professional partnership that stretched into decades. And there's a whole lot about her in the book as well. In the 50s, when you had so much societal pressure for conformity and fitting in and playing well with others and that sort of thing, Elaine May did not go that route. I mean, she was definitely what they would have called a bohemian, definitely had her own take on the world and her own perspective. And that carried over first into her comedy work. Then when she moved into writing and directing, it's quite apparent there as well. And certainly in A New Leaf, which is for mainstream studio comedy, very unconventional. There's a great reason that Paramount hated this picture. It's rumored that she originally would not show them any footage from it, would not provide a rough cut, would not update them on the progress of the production. As the budget went from, I believe it was originally 1.8 million to 4 million, something which unfortunately became commonplace on some of her later projects as well. And then she finally apparently turned in a cut that was 3 hours long, which Paramount absolutely detested and quickly hacked down to, I think it's about 102 minutes now. And that sparked what you were mentioning as far as like the lawsuits, and she tried to get her name taken off it, and she apparently went to the press and told them this is not the movie that I intended to make, and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of controversy surrounding it, and the movie did not do well at the box office. In those days, $4 million on a comedy was a pretty large chunk of change. It did not make its money back, but it's built up an enormous following over the years, especially with people who have sort of a darker, more twisted sense of humor. It's almost like a very warped W.C. Fields kind of film, I guess you could say. If you look at the Walter Matthau character as a contemporary Fields. We should also mention it is in the National Film Registry now. It's preserved by the Library of Congress. So sorry, Paramount. It all worked out for Elaine in the end. You were saying you took a second watch of it. That's probably a really good idea, because the first time you go through A New Leaf, it's kind of jarring exactly the extremes that Elaine May goes to. It's very much a comedy of humiliation and exasperation and things going very wrong. And although she was writing and directing, the film is pretty much centered on Mathau's character. You know, his desperation to get this money. His uncle has loaned him $50,000 to use to find a wealthy wife who, will put his finances back in order. And he only has 6 weeks to pay it back. And so there's this desperation, this deadline that he's got to meet. That's why he winds up pursuing poor Henrietta, who, as you mentioned, is so socially stunted. One of these people who spills food on herself in public and engages in like really awkward conversation. She's like, if you went through life at the same stage you were at in like 6th grade or something, where you're trying to be mature, you're trying to fit in with adults, and it's just not making. And it really is just such an unorthodox kind of movie. And it's definitely one of those things that either you really connect with it, or it's just going to leave you in the dust. It's a very, very kooky film. It's also kind of interesting considering that this is 1971. Walter Matthau, a couple of years before that, had been in a picture called Hello, Dolly with Barbra Streisand, where he's the wealthy one who's being chased by, this aggressive matchmaker played by Barbra Streisand. What I found amusing about the concept for A New Leaf is the shoe is on the other foot. He's the one who has to do the pursuing, has to try to engineer this romance with this utterly guileless, totally trusting woman who never sees what's directly in front of her, even through those Coke bottle glasses that she wears.
I'm so happy that you brought up Hello, Dolly, too, because there's another interesting through line. In both movies, Mathau's character is kind of asexual. Like, he has no romantic interest in either of these women. And in this one, even though he's the one doing the pursuing, he's like, oh, but she has, it's terrible because then she'll have to be around, right? She'll have to be there. And in the other one, he doesn't want Streisand around at all, but he knows that he has to get married. The whole point of Hello, Dolly is everyone's got to get matched up.
Right. And in Hello, Dolly, he sings It Takes a Woman, which is all about it's fine to have a wife as long as she's going to cook and clean and be completely at my disposal. And so basically what he wants is to be married to a servant. It's funny with A New Leaf because initially he's supposed to be a playboy, running around and expect having all these romances and stuff like that. And it's so clear that he, his great love is himself.
Right. He's for sure repulsed by women. Anyway, before we get more into that, Jake, I was relieved to see on Letterboxd that you liked the movie. It's never for sure if you're going to like these older comedies that I recommend for you, Real Life being the big disaster we had on the podcast.
Sorry, Jane. Jane, I know I'm in the minority there, so I assume you're with Brad on this one, but I could not get behind Real Life at all.
And that's another one. That's a classic example. And Paramount again. I believe Paramount handled real life. Case where they put a lot of money behind a person that they acknowledged as a comic genius. They didn't get it back. So,
And I love Albert Brooks. I was so surprised that I couldn't, but that one I don't know, I just couldn't get behind. But I was really glad to know that A New Leaf did not fall into that category. I was just so taken with her, with Elaine May, with her whole. There was just something so magnetic about her in her awkwardness and in her inability to communicate things. I mean, and Walter Matthau was so mean to her, and like James, you call it comedy of humiliation. I was like, yes, I kept thinking it because he's so mean to her, but some of the things he says about her are so funny. And then I found myself like I'd feel a little guilty about laughing, like he said the one about like, oh, this woman, you have to vacuum her every time she eats. It's such a cruel thing to say, but like
that was far and away my favorite, because right after that he's like, I didn't brush her off before she left today.
One of the reasons that people who resist A New Leaf, probably one of the reasons that they do that is because the Elaine May character is so completely innocent and so utterly unworldly. And so immediately your heart goes out to her, and the way that Matthau treats her as, this item that needs to be acquired to sustain his lifestyle. I never felt like I was exactly on his side. And it's true. I mean, that's a hallmark of a lot of her work as a performer, is this just compellingly endearing quirkiness. You just sense this absolutely fabulous mind at work. The things that she came up with in some of the Elaine May and Mike Nichols improv stuff, which there are documentaries on their partnership, and you can see a lot of their TV appearances from the 50s and 60s have been preserved, and you can see them on YouTube. It's incredible.
If you just want an intro, watch their company telephone sketch on YouTube. It's so
funny. Yeah, there's so much. They did Broadway, like a 90-minute collection of their sketches that they did over and over again. You would think, oh, wow, you made it to Broadway. What could be better? This must be the pinnacle of your career. And Elaine May's attitude to where it was, oh my gosh, we've got to go out and do that again. She was just like her character in A New Leaf, didn't have like the same kind of reactions to so many people think of as the hallmarks of success or achievement or celebrity. She just really turned away from all of that. She directed more movies, certainly, but after she kind of slipped out of the light of performing, for the most part, she did a lot of kind of ghostwriting on a bunch of script. Like just about any movie that you see from the 70s or 80s that has really sharp, sparkling dialogue, really snappy lines, it's an excellent chance that Elaine May got her hands on the script at some point.
The big noted one is Tootsie, right?
She did an enormous rewrite on Tootsie. Yes.
I was surprised when I was looking at the movies. She's only directed 5 movies. I had it in my head that she had directed a bunch more movies, but really there was only.
Ishtar is Ishtar being Ishtar.
4 features, and then the Mike Nichols documentary from a couple years ago. I think, Ishtar, I guess, really did kill that directing career dead.
And I don't want to get off on like the Ishtar tangent, because that's a podcast unto itself. There was a targeted Ishtar assassination campaign in 1987. And I don't know, exactly who was behind it. Maybe, Columbia executives, having spent so much money on it, decided to engineer some sort of controversy or something. But I went to an early screening of Ishtar in the spring of 1987, and the house was packed. People were roaring with laughter. Afterwards, everybody was saying, oh, what a hysterically funny movie. Oh, that was so brilliant. And then, like, a few weeks later, all this stuff started, like, supposedly leaking out about how much it cost and all the fights behind the scenes. And Elaine May was out of control and kind of, like, poisoning the well before the movie opened. And by the time it opened, you had people saying, oh my gosh, I'd never go see that. I'm sure it's the worst movie ever made. I've always wondered if there was like someone had a personal vendetta against her, sort of like put this plan into motion or something. It's been interesting in the years since Ishtar. We moved far, far away from it by now. Now people watch it and say, oh, wow, I always thought that was going to be a terrible movie, but it's really good. It's really funny. And they quote from the songs and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, it was always very much a wacky movie. It was the kind of thing where, you know, if it had cost $10 million, nobody would have said a word about it, but it didn't.
I grew up in a post-Ishtar world, so
Yeah.
I didn't like really know it. My first exposure to it was Alex Winter made a movie called Freaked, which is actually a pretty interesting carnival freak movie. There's a character near the end that said, people are running out of here faster than the opening night of Ishtar. And before that, I had no idea what Ishtar was. And now it's the only Elaine May movie I haven't seen yet. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Telling the truth can be a dangerous business. Honest and popular.
I also never did it. So.
Don't know that reference.
You can play the accordion. No one's gonna hire you for a rock and roll band, but we can sing. Oh my God, their songs are so awful and so memorable.
Just briefly before we move on to Harlan County, the thing I think I got on the second watch most that I didn't get on the first watch was the way that Mathau's character, yes, he's cruel. Henry is cruel to Henrietta. The way that he becomes protective of her, like she's his child, earlier on in the movie than I remembered. And also the way that she really does act like a kid. Like when she wants his attention, Henry. It's like he's his dad. And so obviously what bothered me the first time I watched the movie, and I wrote this in my review of it at the time, was I didn't love the way the butler sort of explains to Henry what Henry's growth has been. He's like, oh, but you know, you've become such a better person in this time, which actually reminded me of, Jake, we just watched The Blot. That movie from the 20s where that guy's girlfriend has to tell him that he's become a better person so the audience can know that he's become a better person. But watching it this time, I was like, no, it's very clear ahead of time that the only person who hasn't realized it by the time the movie's over is Henry.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really effective. It gave me a different view of the movie as a whole. And it shot up. So I think now I'm obsessed with Walter Matthau, so I still like a lot of other Walter Matthau movies a lot. But it's in my top 15 now, for sure, out of, he made 70 movies. So
it's got to be one of his most distinctive standout performances.
For sure.
He did a lot of comedy. We should also explain, there's a double meaning to the title because, yes, eventually Henry turns over a new leaf and Henrietta, who's the brilliant botany professor, discovers a new kind of fern. So she's got a new leaf. Double meaning to the title. I would definitely recommend it to people who are willing to take a chance on kind of a really offbeat, rather unconventional comedy. I mean, it unfolds in a way that you could have taken all the Elaine May isms out of it and had, a pretty straightforward kind of screwball comedy. But I think what makes it so fascinating is the fact that her personality is such a major part of it. And you really feel like there's this brilliantly twisted comic mind, working behind screenplay.
And there are some traces of that 3-hour cut still in the movie. Like the scene where Henry finds out he's lost his fortune is a 5-minute scene of him sitting in his lawyer's office. Like, this is going on forever.
Well, and apparently, I think this may have been in the Mike Nichols biography. Elaine May was so technically inexperienced as a director that she would shoot in close-up and not get a master shot. She would be so focused on, getting reaction shots or something that she didn't get coverage. So one of the things that cost a lot of money on the movie was a lot of it had to be restaged and reshot because when they took it to the editors, they couldn't put it together. It was probably going to wind up looking like French New Wave or something with lots of jump cuts and of course, the Paramount wasn't going to release anything like that. So,
it's the bed scene from Breathless by accident.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's funny. You get these almost accidental oneers because there's just no other footage for them to have used.
Well, and some directors do that, to protect themselves because they don't want to have alternatives for the studio to pick out. So it's just this was the only printable take that we had of it.
My favorite example, though, of her and experience watching this time around, which I did not notice the first time, after that attorney scene, Matthau walks out onto the street and he's just looking up into the air. He's so upset. And they clearly didn't clear the street. to film the shot because there's people walking up to the camera going like, and then walking around.
And that's something that you learn as a director, if you're going to shoot on location, you have to secure the location.
It's so funny.
So that you don't have people going, "Hi, Mom."
Yeah, it was great.
I would like to watch it a second time. I'd like to show it to my wife because I wasn't sure how, if she'd be into it, but I now that having seen it, I think she would really like it too. So,
but take us into documentary territory now.
Yeah, documentary. Harlan County, USA. I chose this movie because this is the only documentary we have on our list for this season. I thought it was important to cover one of the more famous documentaries directed by a woman. And Harlan County, USA has been on my list for a long time. I've heard about it. It was an Oscar winner. It's frequently cited amongst best documentaries. So that was kind of an easy choice for me because I really like documentaries and I've always wanted to see this movie. It tells a story about Harlan County in northern Kentucky and the long strike that they went through trying to get workers' rights for the local miners. I should say miners like coal miners, not like miners under 18, miners from coal miners here, searching for the for those workers' rights and the resistance that they ran into and the difficulties that they had and the struggles. And it's just kind of a portrait. This is from 1976, so again before my lifetime. So I don't have I don't have any memories of that. The movie does an incredible job of really placing you into that time and place. Actually, I thought it was really outstanding. Certainly agree with a lot of its historical praise. James, what's your history with this movie? I imagine you had seen this before.
Yeah. It was funny because I remember I had a film class in college where we were studying documentaries. And I was sick the day that we screened Harlan County, so I didn't see it then. It was one of these films that for years I kept meaning to catch up with it, but there's so many other things out there. And finally, I saw it on TCM a few years ago. And once I did, I felt like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd seen this movie so many years ago. One of the things that's I think is particularly striking about Harlan County, USA, the strike began in 1973. So Barbara Kopple, our director, follows these people around for years. It wasn't one of these like run and gun things where she dropped in for a few weeks and shot some footage and put it together. She extensively followed a whole bunch of characters. I mean, it's not a documentary that's just about one particular family. Like the center is the community as a whole, really. She did such an incredible job of capturing their lives and their struggles without sentimentalizing it, without romanticizing it. There are a lot of really well-intentioned documentaries out there that would cover a situation like this and try to almost take a patronizing tone toward, oh, look at these poor people. Oh, my God. And she doesn't do that at all. I mean, it's like enormous respect for the humanity and the heritage of these characters, which is probably going on to some extent even now, 50 years later. Generations of people who are going through exactly the same motions as the generations before them. So many of the young men get to a certain point in school, probably 14, 15, 16, and then what are your career options? Well, you go into the mines and you start working in the mines and you spend years in the mines. And a lot of the women wind up, marrying people who work in the mine. This becomes kind of like the bedrock, the foundation of your existence. What Barbara Kopple does so well is to show the stark contrast between these people who are barely eking out a living, pretty much hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck kind of existence. And then you have Duke Power Company in a situation that I think perhaps a lot of people even these days can relate to. I think it's mentioned somewhere that their profits went up like 170% over the course of 1 year. Obviously, their executives are obviously very comfortable. And yet they're completely dependent on the self-sacrifice of these Appalachian people who go in and actually do the work and wind up being involved in accidents and mine cave-ins, and of course black lung disease, which is discussed extensively and sung about in the film. Like the people just deteriorate pretty much from the inside out due to like the constant inhalation of coal dust, probably smoke and fumes and whatever else is down there. It should also be noted that this was not one of these cases where some dilettante East Coast filmmaker flitted in and brought her camera crew and hung out just for a brief amount of time. Kopple and her crew faced some enormous dangers making this. I mean, they were physically assaulted. They were beaten up at various points. They were shot at, and that's in the movie. Just felt like such enormous compassion, both for the people that we meet and also for the people who made this film and like literally risked their lives to tell this story, which, as I said, I think is so potent today when you have so much discussion about economic inequality and the super rich getting super richer and vision about market manipulation and the debate over affordability and that sort of thing. I mean, a lot of that is kind of like the through line of Harlan County, USA as well. There's a whole lot of that discussion going on.
What I thought was super interesting, just from I didn't have a lot of background about it. Aside from, I kept thinking, I don't have kids. I don't know what education is like in public schools now. But I just kept thinking, James, you mentioned people still go through this. We don't have labor education, I don't think. The labor movements of the United States are really important. And aside from like the New Deal, which is a government-mandated set of laws, we don't know much about the history of labor in the United States, or we don't learn it as kids, so people don't know anything about union organizing or what their rights are. Last night my wife and I watched The Shop Around the Corner, which is light holiday movie about a leather shop starring James Stewart. I kept thinking, though, in it, like all these people, and granted it takes place in Hungary, but all these people are so indebted to the owner of the shop. If he fires them, their life is over. Like there's a point where a guy's trying to make a joke and he goes, "Are you sure you want to?" The owner says, "Are you sure you want to make this joke?" He goes, "No, I have a family. I don't want to make the joke. Right. I can't lose the job."
Yeah.
And that's the position that a lot of people, like most Americans, most people in the world are in. You are more or less a servant of your employer. This is where all these socialist ideas come from, is to not be completely exploited by your employer. We don't learn any of that stuff outside of maybe if you learn about the Russian Revolution, you get some of these ideas.
Mm-hmm. Framed as like, oh, well, it was the communists who came in and preyed on the proletariat and got them to overthrow the Tsar, and then the communists came in and they were just as bad, if not worse.
We actually reviewed the animated Animal Farm on this.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh.
But so I was thinking about that. But what I thought was so incredible what Kopple did, and she was able to do it because, as James said, she was embedded with these people for so long. There are characters who emerge in the story. The main one for me was the foreman, who was, a gun thug, as they put it, for the coal company, and was constantly antagonizing people on the picket line. He kept showing up with his hand on his gun in his pocket. The cops don't come to do anything about him until pretty deep into the film. So I found it really compelling in that way too, because this is like a verite movie where the filmmaker is not a part, aside from like a few moments where you hear her voice, she's really not a part of, she's not a part of the story at all, except for when she's threatened one time.
Yeah.
I'm sure it can be quite difficult to make a narrative out of this, but then part of it was history helped her, because there's 2 murders that happen in the course of this story. The first of which, I watched this movie as part of like a marathon. I had to get a lot of movies in before we recorded this. So I was getting a little sleepy. And all of a sudden, you find out that the guy running for president of the union has been murdered along with his family.
Jablonski, yeah.
That perked me right up.
And that was national news. That was a big, big story.
Yeah, well, it's quite shocking. It's really horrifying what happened to that family. And then there was the killing of the union worker later on, which was the catalyst for the strike ending, the first strike ending. It really captured my attention in that way. And a lot of the time I find that like, I'm not as, Jake, I know you're super into documentaries. I'm not as into documentary film as you are. And some of that is, especially now with like the Netflixification of documentaries, it all just feels the same. Just like this talking head, little bit of footage, talking head, little bit of footage. The narrative is written, I feel like, before the interviews even happen. And I just have to give a shout out to my friend and neighbor, Alex Megaro, who this year edited, well, he didn't do it this year. It's taken him many years, but he edited and produced a great documentary film called WTO 99 that's touring now festivals and smaller theaters about the huge protest when the World Trade Organization came to Seattle in 1999. He's produced an incredible, incredible movie, and I highly recommend if it comes to your town that folks check it out. because it's so good. And it's similar to this in that it's different in that it's all found footage. It's all footage that was taken either by people on the ground or by clips from the news then or from press conferences then. And they've crafted a really compelling story. But, he's told me that they've really tried to keep the narrative voice out of it. And I think he does as good a job as you can. I mean, I know his politics, so I kind of knew where it was going to go. But I think it's also the politics of most at this point.
I think there are a lot of, when you were talking about the Netflixification of documentaries, yes. I think there are a surplus of people who become documentary filmmakers because they want to put themselves at the heart of the project and, be a star, and it becomes like an extension of your social media profile. It's like, oh, look at me out here talking to these people, and like
the Michael Moore syndrome. Yeah,
you're so right about what Barbara Kopple does here. I mean, she definitely didn't go there so that she can be like the great savior swooping in to, enlighten these people and play the mediator and solve these problems. I mean, she's there as an observer, and she's almost entirely on the sidelines, except for like the instances that you mentioned, where due to circumstances, she does become part of the story. So then, the choice is made to address that rather than to gloss over it. But I think that's something that's become such an unfortunate staple of a lot of documentaries these days, is the filmmaker forgetting who the real subject is. And that's certainly not the case in Harlan County, USA.
For sure. In fact, she had so much patience. You can see, like, not only did she wait to tell the initial story, but this film doesn't come out until after the initial strike is wrapped up, after all the fallout from the change in the union structure to the subsequent strikes. Like, she waited years to release the movie. Yeah. She's very much not positioning herself as like because of my movie, this happened. Right. It's like, this all happened and it's in the movie.
And it came out just in time for the bicentennial, when everything was like, yay, America, everything's great here. And it's like, and here's Harlan County, USA, which like reveals a lot about like the not so nice history of America.
Yeah. I don't know if either of you watched the show Justified, the Timothy Oliphant show? It's very good, and it takes place in Harlan County, and it all is sort of like about why this town that has this fallout from these miners, and it's also decades later too. So this like dead town basically, and how crime was able to swoop in and, take the place. It's also very much about like how the opioid crisis has destroyed the American South.
Oh, yeah.
And also it has character actress Margot Martindale as one of the key villains, and she's incredible in it.
She's always so great. That's an interesting point, too, because you've got, back in the days of Harlan County, USA, so you're looking at like early to mid 70s. Yeah, you don't have the opioid epidemic creeping in at that point. I mean, there were certainly drugs, and there was ever-present moonshine, and I have to confess, I mean, I have relatives who live in that part of the world, and some of them did operate in moonshine still. So the really kind of tragic thing that I took away from Harlan County, USA is we have the blessing / curse of knowing what happened in like the next 50 years, as far as like the weakening of the unions and like continuation of this cycle. What was it? The workers at one point are offered like a 4% increase in the mid 70s, when you literally had double-digit inflation and prices were soaring. I think the cost of living was going up like 7 or 8% every year. I remember my parents complaining about it, being exasperated by how fast prices were rising. You have a company that, raking in enormous profits and being so unwilling to share that success with anybody else. And unfortunately, 50 years later, the song remains the same pretty much.
Yeah, if not worse. I mean, I'm sure that the gap between the worker and the CEO at this point is much more vast. Jake, what are we missing?
The music. We haven't really touched on the music in this movie yet, but the music is absolutely almost ever present. I mean, there are songs. And I'm a big folk singer guy. We recently, Brad, I know we talked about the mysterious passing of Todd Snyder, who was a very important songwriter for me, meant a lot to me. And these songs reminded me of like songs that that he would have sang, these like just really great folk songs is kind of, really expressing and illustrating further, kind of what's going on. It almost seemed obtrusive at first. I was like, okay, gosh, like enough with for the first couple songs. I'm like, wow, they're really going to do this the whole movie. But then that kind of really grew on me too. I really appreciated the use of the songs and like how they just kind of expounded on what was going on and really fit the tone of what the story was telling.
Well, I'm so glad you brought it up because I forget the name of the woman who composed the song, but the song "Which Side Are You On" was composed in the 1930s at the previous very famous miners' strike that took place. So it gave you this through line that like this is an ongoing issue. This isn't something that just propped up because the workers got noisy in the 70s. Where that really helped me connect was when I was growing up, I was really into punk music. The Dropkick Murphys had done a cover of that song. And so when she starts singing, I'm like, oh my God, that's the drop. So for me, it created this like, wow, this has been going on for a long time. And I didn't know this until I started Googling the song and putting it through my Spotify, that Pete Seeger is now the most well-known cover of Which Side Are You On was by him. And he did it so many versions with so many of the different groups that he played with. It's like the anthem, right? It's such a great anthem for union movements and not being a scab.
And so many songs that speak to like the personal struggles. Dark as a Dungeon is incorporated into the soundtrack, which I believe is a Woody Guthrie song about this endless generational cycle of coal miners, and they eventually turn as black as the coal, according to the lyrics. And then they are buried and they become part of the coal. And beautifully grim, poignant lyrics. There's a song about black lung disease, and a lot of it is performed by the local people. Obviously, so much a part of their heritage, and perhaps like an avenue of escape for dealing with some of the conditions that they have to deal with. What do? You turn it into art. And for people who want to know more about what this area of the world is like, really extraordinary podcast, or it's a public radio program called Inside Appalachia from West Virginia Public Broadcasting. When I was living in Virginia for 8 years, I got really hooked on it, and I didn't expect to, because I thought, what does this have to do with the world that I'm in? But it really delves into the history of the area and the culture of the area, breaks a lot of the stereotypes of people who don't live there or don't know the area tend to think of narrow kind of characterization. It really gives you a fascinating, multifaceted portrait of life in Appalachia then and now. Dovetails beautifully with this film.
Great. I think it's time for homework. So the last movie that we put on, we don't usually do more than 2 movies a week. It's one from Jake and one from me, but Jeanne Dielman was directed by a woman, did come out in the 70s, and reached the top of the Sight and Sound list in 2022, much to the chagrin of Paul Schrader. I just can't stop thinking about how angry he was that happened. It was the first time I noticed that he was going to be grumpy online, and since now he's like a proponent for AI in movies, so I think we can discard his opinion entirely. But that aside, we watched this. Jake, I watched it yesterday. Did you also watch it yesterday?
Yeah, I watched it yesterday.
Okay, so it's saw it.
First time,
wow.
yeah.
So it's fresh in your mind. Ooh.
Very fresh. As fresh as a plate of meatball meat of ground beef.
As fresh as a pan of overcooked, lovingly peeled potatoes.
Yep, exactly. Oh my God. No, that was the most nervous I was in the entire movie, was watching her peel the potatoes with the paring knife.
When I was working for Alamo Drafthouse for 12 years, and I was threatening, we had our famous movie parties, which are, you take a movie and you try to make it interactive, so you give people things to do at their seat that coordinate with what's going on screen. And I was threatening to do a Jeanne Dielman party and give everybody a bucket of potatoes and a paring knife. And you have to peel along with her.
Oh my God. Just give them some laundry to fold. Come on.
What the folded laundry?
So anyway, for those who are not aware, this is, I don't know how to call it, anything but an experimental film. It's 3 hours and 20 minutes of a woman doing chores and then a shocking act of violence.
Oh, boy, yeah.
At the very end of the movie. It is exactly what it says on the tin, which is this woman is a widow. To make ends meet, she accepts the company of men once a day. Other than that, she's caring for her home and for her teenage son, who's quite strange, this boy. He's got a lot of weird questions for his mom.
Their mother and son but it's almost like somebody off the street just came in.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they have not much closeness and personal communication going on.
No. She doesn't seem to have much of a relationship with anything except for her routine. And then as
her potatoes are her friends.
Her potatoes, her coffee, until they all turn on her.
Yes. Brew.
Because slowly over the course of 3 days, and I cannot emphasize the word slowly enough, because it's really super subtle and very slowly, her routine hits a few bumps and she becomes incredibly emotionally disturbed by some coffee that's gone bad, by potatoes that are mushy, and by a baby that won't stop crying. I want to get to the baby at some point. But Jake, what was your first impression of this movie?
My first impression of the movie, I mean, number one, I think it's really cool that a movie like this could even get made. You know what I mean? Like, whether or not it's for me, and I'm still not sure if it is or not, I don't think it is. But just the fact that this movie exists, I think, is kind of its own little miracle. Like, that enough money got put together for her to make this movie clearly the way that she wanted to. I think that's very cool. It's a tough hang, though. It's really hard. You know, I try my best, you know, like to turn my phone, like I set my phone to do not disturb when I'm watching movies, you know, because I don't, you know, want to get a text or whatever. And I tried really, really hard to pay close attention to this movie. But man, I remember this, there's a Jerry Seinfeld joke. So I see he's talking about to be continued TV episodes. He was like, if I wanted a long, boring story with no point to it, I have my life. And that's what I kept thinking of, like, while I'm watching this movie. I'm like, I can do all of these things, you know, except for, you know, the last 5 minutes or so of the movie. That didn't speak to me as much, but it was like, yeah, this, I don't know. So on one hand, like, I respect it and admire it a great deal. And on the other hand, like, I would never recommend this movie, like, I can't think of another person side of present company I would ever say, like, you should probably see this movie.
James, when did you first see it?
Oh my gosh. It was probably like about 3 or 4 years ago. It was around the time that the Sight and Sound poll came out and it was the #1 movie, because I had seen bits and pieces of it, but I had not seen the entire thing. And I said it was on HBO Max on demand or something like that. And I thought, well, it's not going to be there forever, so I better sit down and watch it. So I cleared an evening and sat down and watched it. And I have to say, I watched it more than once because I'm a total masochist. It's the epitome of the slow cinema genre. You know, the quintessential cinema verite movie where what happens is dictated entirely by the rhythm of life and not by the screenplay. Although there was a screenplay, apparently. And Chantal Akerman, who directed this, she shot the film over the course of 5 weeks, and she had an all-female crew because, again, we're dealing with a film that was made in the mid-'70s. I believe, I'm not absolutely certain, but I believe that one of the reasons that she got the government money to make the film was the fact that the feminist movement in Europe at the time was so strong, and she hired an all-female crew for it, which she said she later regretted, because she didn't get to pick the people that she worked with. And a lot of them did not have the experience to work on this kind of a project. And she said the shoot was very, very difficult. It was shot in Brussels. I think there was she said there was a screenplay. I have a feeling of what she was working from more or less was an outline or like a series of events that she wanted to capture. Because you certainly cannot imagine like reading a screenplay for Jeanne Dielman. It unfolds. If somebody told you it was a documentary, you'd probably believe them, except that it's not. It's, you know, Delphine Seyrig is an actress, and the other people in it are certainly actors and that sort of thing. The way that it moves or doesn't move forward, it does remind you very much of like some sort of found footage or, you know, maybe like a security camera video. I don't know. What I really liked about the movie, and it's not a movie where, you know, you come away from it going, ooh, I just loved it. It was so good. But what I picked up on, the thing that I think Chantal Akerman communicates so vividly, one of my favorite novels is Paula Fox's Desperate Characters, which is largely built around these characters in New York who are just going through these very kind of commonplace upper middle class lives. Underneath it all, there's like this kind of insidious stress that's creeping into their minds from this constant repetition of, you know, doing the same thing over and over, going to the same places, eating the same lunches, you know, making the same choices and that sort of thing. A lot of that also comes through in Jeanne Dielman, where you feel like even though she's, I guess, making it from day to day and going along with her life and that sort of thing, you kind of feel that there's this mounting psychic cost that's coming. And as you move into the second half of the movie, yeah, things start to go a little bit wrong, or things start to feel kind of off kilter, and that kind of sets you up for, well, I don't want to give it away, but yeah, there's a unforgettable act that wraps up that provides the denouement, as they say in French. It's interesting because, like, Jeanne seems to be the kind of person who has this feeling of control over her life or circumstances, largely operating in and out of her home and that sort of thing. Seems to be somebody who is very accustomed to this environment that she's set up for herself. Yet, there's like the kind of weirdness element you alluded to earlier, where she's not exactly, I don't think you could call her a prostitute, but yeah, I mean, she's kind of a call girl. I mean, she has apparently appointments or regular steady customers who are coming in, and she's having some very passionless, unerotic sexual encounters with them and accepting money and putting it in the soup tureen. You kind of feel like she must be on the same wavelength as like the Jane Fonda character in Clute, Brie Daniels, who is a call girl and has these sessions with her psychiatrist where she talks about how she's compelled to do it because she loves being in control, and she's in control of the situation, and she controls the process. And you're just thinking to yourself, but that's just total illusion, because you think you're in control, but you're entirely reliant on the behavior of others. And Jeanne is kind of in the same boat where it doesn't take much to really upset this orderly world that she's constructed for herself. I would not like to see a lot more movies like this, I will say that. But I was very glad that I watched it and rewatched it, because I did feel like I got what Chantal Akerman was trying to communicate as far as the price we pay for going through the motions, as they used to say in the 70s, shining it on, doing what you do and stuff like that, that eventually, this does have a payoff that's probably not going to be pleasant. Do I love Jeanne Dielman? I've experienced it. I have had that experience, and I have relived that experience. And
that's saying something.
Yeah, I can't guarantee that I will go back to it time and time again. I don't think I'll buy the Criterion collection, put it on when I'm peeling my own potatoes.
The day before I watched this, I saw Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair in the theater, and then stayed through the credits to watch Tarantino's crappy video game short that aired afterwards.
Oh, no.
And while I was in the chair after the movie is like, the Kill Bill is like highly kinetic and action packed, and I was never bored for 4 hours. I was not bored. And then I'm sitting there in the chair and thinking, I know that this crap after the credits is going to be bad, but I'm going to stay and watch it anyway because it exists and I've been here. But it wasn't until that moment that I felt like I was stirring in my seat. And I got about an hour into Jeanne Dielman before that happened to me. And I was sitting on my couch, which is much more comfortable in the theater. And I also put my phone away because the woman on TCM told me that I had to put my phone away and endure this movie. It's the first time I've ever been warned. I guess Gone with the Wind kind of has a warning before it, but it's a different kind of.
Yeah. They actually had kind of a warning before Performance, the Nicholas Roeg movie. They were introducing it and they were going, it's really strange. Brace yourself for something very different. It was like, yeah, to say the least.
A couple of times when I was watching, I'd be like, all right, I'm probably about 45 minutes in at this point. No, it was like 28. And then, I'd watch a little bit longer, I'm like, all right, we got to be about an hour and a half into this thing. And it's like 105. Like, oh, come on. Like, it did drag for, quite a bit. And, but you expect that going into it. You're like, I didn't know a ton about this movie, but I did know, like, I have seen, like, the one sentence description, bored woman does chores. I'm like, all right, well, so I kind of knew what to expect. But even knowing, like, what to expect, it was still just, like you said, I've experienced it. I can't even say it's like a bad bad movie. It's such a hard movie. I'm so OCD about giving star ratings to everything. I love the Letterboxd, and I've always been, giving movies star ratings and everything. And it's one of these movies, and we covered one we talked about last week on the podcast too. For our 1960s episode, we talked about Daisies, which was a very similar experience. It was like, this movie is good at so many of the things that it wants to be. I'm just not all that interested in like the things that it wants to be. So that was kind of my struggle with Jeanne Dielman. Was just it's so hard to say, like, is this a 3-star movie to me, because I I appreciate so much about it, but I was also not that invested in it. So like, is it like a 2 or 2? Does that even adequately describe, like I said, the experience of watching this movie? It's one of the very few movies I think that kind of defies the whole star rating system.
I think it would be very, very difficult to put a star rating. Does it succeed in what it sets out to do? I think brilliantly. Are most people going to want to take that journey and make that commitment to watching the daily travails of a Brussels woman just doing household chores? I think more people would rather watch Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair. Yeah.
There were more people in my Whole Bloody Affair theater than there were in my living room, and other people were invited, but did not come.
Really? Oh my gosh.
There are other movies that I thought of that are a little bit more accessible that are like this. It reminded me of Kelly Reichardt's Showing Up, her art school movie, which features a lot of routine. I mean, all Kelly Reichardt movies feature routine, but this is more like everyday routine of just like going to school or like creating art. That has comedy in it, which is nice. And then Sean Baker's Takeout is a really interesting movie that's really similar to this and about half the length, about a Chinese immigrant who's here. I can't remember if he's illegally here, but either way, he owes money to the people who got him here, and he has to do a certain amount of deliveries to make up the money he owes before they, I think, beat him up. And it's not glamorous. It's not like it's not an action movie. It's literally just him going to the restaurant, getting food, going to these different apartments, people paying him. They have different reactions to him. It's raining in New York City. So there's a bit more to it, but not a lot. And I just think and I don't know if I would call it slow cinema because it doesn't feel as contemplative or meditative as Jeanne Dielman or a Kelly Reichardt movie or like a Yasujiro Ozu movie, which this feels like she watched all the Ozu movies and framed everything in the exact same way. It's much shaggier Takeout. But it's cool. And also Baker was in the news a lot last year because of Enora. Yeah, worth seeing one of his earlier movies, which looks nothing like his newer movies.
I'm so glad you brought up Kelly Reichardt because that's a really astute comparison point. If you are into Kelly Reichardt, especially like the earlier films that she did, you're probably going to have like the time of your life at Jeanne Dielman. If you are an acolyte of slow cinema, this is the slow cinema gold mine. It also kind of reminded me, did you see, there was a movie Tom Hardy did, I think in 2013 called Locke, where he's driving.
He's just talking to himself, right?
Driving, like talking to brilliant performance, and, very claustrophobic, which, and the claustrophobia aspect comes into play a bit in Jeanne Dielman too. This isolation, this containment, and yet there's all this tension beneath the surface and that sort of thing. That was another one that came to mind when I was watching Jeanne Dielman. It would be fascinating to get, I'm sure it didn't have like test screenings or focus groups or anything because it was a government-funded movie made in Brussels in the 70s. It would be hilarious to bring in, like recruit people off the street and tell them, hey, you want to watch a new movie? And then show them Jeanne Dielman. And let's get those comment cards.
One connection. I don't know what else to say about Jeanne Dielman. I feel like my brain was so mushed by the movie. But one connection I meant to make between A New Leaf and an earlier episode we did was at Paramount, Elaine May. She was the first woman hired to be a director on a movie at Paramount. It had been 40 years. And the previous woman hired was Dorothy Arzner, who we talked about in our 1920s episode. The movie that she made, the last movie made at Paramount directed by a woman, had been Merrily We Go to Hell, which wasn't one of the movies that we reviewed, but I watched it anyway because I heard it was good. And
incredible movie. Yeah.
So I don't know what to do about lists for this. Actually, James, what are some of your favorite female directed movies of the 70s off the top?
Oh, these three are are a great start. There's full disclosure, I know the director and I've worked with her, so I'm a little bit biased, but there's a really wonderful film from director Claudia Weil called Girlfriends that was made in I think 78 or 79. And it's about female friendship and friendship that's complicated when somebody, falls in love and gets into a serious relationship, and the complexities of trying to balance an ongoing friendship and an ongoing relationship and that sort of thing. That was one that I really enjoyed. It was so rare to really see female directors working in the 70s. There's really been like a boom time for female directors, unfortunately. But that was one that definitely stood out to me. Girlfriends.
Yeah, the only other one I can really think of for myself is Hester Street.
Oh, that's also wonderful. Joan Macklin Silver. Yeah, that's also a wonderful movie.
Yeah, the United States really dropped the ball on this. It's almost all Europeans doing the work.
It really was. Yeah, you do. You have Dorothy Arzner, who is working in the 20s and 30s. I think she might possibly have gotten into the early 40s, but she didn't stick around long after that. The 50s and 60s the 40s, 50s, and 60s for female directors, I mean, you really have to look hard. They were certainly screenwriters. They were certainly working in other aspects, wardrobe, makeup, that sort of thing. But for female filmmakers to actually take the director's chair, major studio projects in those days, yeah, it didn't really happen. And I often wonder, you had so many strong female stars at the time. You think back on the Barbara Stanwicks, the Joan Crawfords, the Betty Davises, Susan Hayward. It kind of makes me wonder, did none of them ever suggest giving a female director a chance, or was it just considered to be too far out in left field? I don't know. But you certainly have a lot of movies from that period, in many cases written by brilliant women as well.
Jake, any other thoughts before you wrap up?
Just that I'm glad we finally watched Jeanne Dielman, just because since 2022, since the Sight and Sound poll, as a film nerd, it's been on my list since then. So I'm glad we finally did it. I'm glad I have you guys that I could talk about it with, because like I said, I can't imagine anybody else I could even say the title to and have them know what I'm talking about. So I appreciate you guys being here with me for it.
Yeah, I find that list so baffling. Citizen Kane is number one for 40, 50 years. That makes sense to me. Vertigo is a movie that I can't lock in on. It eludes me a little bit. So for 20 years, Vertigo, I'm like, I get it's well loved. This one really surprised me, and I think I'd be pretty surprised if it sticks at number 1 in 2032.
My suspicion when they announced it was, that's a fluke. That's there must have been somebody who was personally lobbying for it or something. It's a fascinating choice, a provocative choice. Definitely, I'm sure, got many, many more people to watch Jeanne Dielman than would ever have watched it otherwise. Yeah, it does not seem like something with much staying power. It does not seem like I'd be like you said, I'd be very, very surprised if it's at the top when they do the next poll.
Well, James, thanks so much for coming on. Jake was so excited. I've been hearing about James Sanford. I went to Western Michigan University also, so I've been hearing about you the whole time. Yeah.
All right.
That's where we met. Yeah, that's where Brad and I met.
That's where Jake and I met. Yeah. So we're all West Michigan people here. So it's such a trip to have you on. You're real. That's wild.
Yeah.
It's funny because I sometimes come in for guest spots on these shows and they're, oh, wow, I thought you'd be 80 years old. Or,
that's not what you want to hear.
But yeah, I mean, I was hired by the Grand Rapids Press when I was 16. So I've been doing this for quite a while, but I started really young. So.
Yeah,
you did.
Well, we benefited from your experience, but not age, just experience.
Right.
This has been an absolute pleasure. What a thrill to talk about 3 such renowned films, 2 that are in the National Film Registry and one that's at the top of the Sight and Sound poll. Very prominent stuff.
All right, so we'll be back next week with much more populist films.
Yes.
From the 80s, we'll be looking at Barbra Streisand's Yentl and Mary Lambert's Pet Sematary.
I don't want to be buried in a pet cemetery.